Hello, everyone, and welcome to NASA's STEMathon. This session is entitled Launching Your Career into Space. I'm Bree Hill. I'm a public affairs officer at NASA headquarters and your moderator for today's session. Today, you all will get a unique opportunity to hear from Pam Melroy, the Deputy Administrator for NASA headquarters, and astronaut Jasmin Moghbeli. They are going to discuss their careers, the importance of STEM, and the important role that you, the next generation, the Artemis generation, will have in developing technologies of the future. Today, during this session, we ask that you use the Q&A box to answer your questions, to have your questions answered live from Deputy Administrator Melroy and astronaut Jasmin Moghbeli. First, without delay, I would like to introduce our panelists. First up is Deputy Administrator Pam Melroy. Pam graduated from MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She became an Air Force test pilot, and she is a former astronaut, and she's had 3 missions to space. And she has been one of 2 women to command the space shuttle. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Bree.
Also, next is Jasmin Moghbeli. She is a current NASA astronaut. She was selected in 2017 with her astronaut candidate graduation in 2020. Jasmin also graduated from MIT, and she was a Marine Corps test pilot. Thank you, Jasmin, for being here today.
Thanks so much, Bree, for having me. Excited to be here.
This is going to be wonderful for the kids. Pam, if I can ask you, why did you choose your career field, and what did the journey to your career look like?
Well, back when I was in high school, I was very inspired earlier by the Apollo program and decided I wanted to be an astronaut. But the only astronauts that I knew about at the time were military jet test pilots. So I decided that's what I was going to do. But women were not actually allowed to be either astronauts or test pilots or military pilots at all until I was in high school. So I was very fortunate to be, I think, born at the right time. That's what I wanted to do. Of course, today we have lots of kinds of astronauts who have scientific backgrounds, but Jasmin and I both chose to become test pilots. And that was so much fun. You start out as a military pilot and get your experience, and then you go to test pilot school and become a test pilot who figures out how to do experiments with airplanes. And that was really fun. But of course, my goal was always to fly in space. And so that was my path.
That's excellent. Now, Jasmin, same question for you. What made you select your career field?
So I became interested in military service from a pretty young age. Probably by junior high, I felt pretty confident I would want to go into the military at some point. My family had a history of military service in Iran, and when my grandfather would come visit us from Iran, he would tell me stories about his time in the Navy. And so I got interested in the military at a young age, and I also became interested in both aviation and space at a young age. When I was in 6th grade, I had done a book report on Valentina Tereshkova, and we got to pretend we were that person for the day in school. So from then on, it's like, I want to be an astronaut. And similarly, I knew one route, and by that point, there were other routes to become an astronaut. You didn't have to be a military test pilot. But for me, with my interest in the military and in aviation, that seemed like a route that I wanted to take. And regardless of whether I became an astronaut or not, would be something I would want to do. So when I graduated from high school, I decided to also go to MIT and studied aerospace engineering there. And once I graduated, became a helicopter pilot. And I hesitated for a bit because I thought you had to be a jet pilot to become an astronaut. But once I joined the Marine Corps and learned more about the different missions and aircraft you could fly, I really wanted to fly helicopters. The first time I saw a Cobra, I wanted to fly it. And so I was really torn about, I thought getting rid of this dream of becoming an astronaut potentially and going for helicopters or going for jets, which I just personally wasn't as passionate about. But luckily, while I was waiting to start flight school, I went and watched the shuttle launch, and Sunny Williams was on that launch, Navy helicopter pilot. And so from then on, I was like, oh, you can be a helicopter pilot and still become an astronaut. So I went for helicopter. I was lucky to get my first choice, which was the Cobra, and from there did 3 deployments in that, and realized, hey, now's an opportunity to go for that dream of becoming a test pilot. And so while I was on that 3rd deployment, I applied to test pilot school. And I'm sure our deputy administrator probably felt the same way. What I loved about it was it combined that operational experience with the engineering background. And so that was something I really loved, in being able to, as a test pilot, influence the aircraft and the systems on those aircraft that would go out to the rest of, in my case, mostly it was for Marine pilots. So that was something I really loved. And while I was doing that, I applied to become an astronaut and was lucky enough to end up here.
That is fascinating. Who knew that you could choose the helicopters and airplanes? That's like, I'm sorry, for me, I'm so excited to even be talking to you guys right now. You have no idea. I'm more excited than the kids probably. My next question for you, Pam, what experiences do you think contributed to you becoming the leader you are today for NASA?
Well, I think for me, one of the things that I became very passionate about, even while I was in college, was about leadership. And I began to understand that it was a discipline that you can practice and learn and get better at. And it seemed like a really important one, because you have the opportunity to make things happen. I mean, that's what leaders do, and teams. And they're both two sides of the same coin. To be a good leader, you have to understand what it means to be a good team member, and vice versa. So for me, it was actually going through ROTC in college that taught me that I needed to be a lifelong learner around leadership. And that is something that is so important to me. And so I've tried to absorb the lessons through my whole career. Operational leadership is one kind of leadership. As both Jasmin and I have experienced, when you're the commander of an aircraft, oftentimes you have to make decisions very quickly that affect the lives and the safety of everyone on board, and also the accomplishment of the mission. And that's a certain type of leadership skill that you have to be able to make those difficult decisions quickly, and also to stay calm under pressure. As I've gone on in my career, especially like when I became a shuttle commander, I was responsible for coordinating across a lot of different parts of NASA to successfully get the mission done. And I needed to build up my organizational skills. How do you understand how a group of people are organized, and what does each group care about? What's their mission? What is their responsibility? And how do you work with them to get things done? And it requires a different kind of thinking, and it's a little bit slower. It's a little more strategic. And then ultimately, in the position that I'm now as the Deputy Administrator of NASA, the kinds of decisions that I make, sometimes they're fast decisions, like I did when I was an aircraft commander. And sometimes they are organizational decisions, working with other agencies and other stakeholders and groups inside NASA to make decisions. And then sometimes you have to set strategic decisions. And that means you need to be a visionary leader and think out 20 years in the future, and set a destination. So for me, that evolution from an operational to an organizational to a strategic leader is what has been a really important part of my journey.
That is absolutely fascinating. And I have my next question, which is for Jasmin, is what advice do you have for students who are pursuing the dream of becoming an astronaut?
Sure. Well, that's, something we both mentioned earlier was, when you look at the folks who are astronauts today, it looks different than it did back when NASA selected their first group of 7 astronauts back in '59, they were all military test pilots. Now, if you look at the astronauts today, things have evolved a lot. We have teachers, we have lots of different scientists, geologists, chemists. We have military test pilots still. So we have doctors. So many different paths you can pursue to get here. So I think one of the things I would say is pursue something you're passionate about. For me, and it goes back to the helicopters or jets. I think if I had been a jet pilot, I wouldn't have been as passionate about it. I wouldn't have done as well. So for me, pursuing helicopters was, I think, what ultimately led me here. So pursuing what you're passionate about, I think, is really important. And also recognizing that anything human space exploration in general, it's very difficult, and human space exploration is especially difficult. And so recognizing we're doing very hard things, and in order to get to this point, you're going to have to do hard things, and not being afraid to fail and not being afraid to ask for help. Right now, to become an astronaut for NASA, you do have to pursue an education in STEM, but you also need to be a team player. You need to be able to work with others. And you think about the missions that we're starting to do in the next few years, going to the moon and developing base there, a sustained base there, and then eventually going on to Mars. These are long duration missions we're doing. And so you need to be able to work with a team of people and not only ask for help when you need it, but also give help to others when they need it. So I think recognizing that there's more than just having your technical proficiency, that is absolutely very important, but you need to also recognize there are other skills such as being able to be a leader and also a follower and being a team player that also are very important in this job.
Thank you for that. I have some questions coming in for the kids, if it's okay if I pivot to that portion of the Q&A. Our first question that's popped in is, for high school students who are interested in working for NASA in the future, what would you recommend focusing on, like activities or courses? Pam, may I ask you that question?
Yeah, I think I'd like to just pick up the theme of what Jasmin was talking about. Certainly, I think it's really important to do well in high school because it will prepare you better for the degree that you go on to have in college. And currently, because the things that we do are very technical, not just the engineering aspects of human spaceflight, but also the science that we do. I mean, we go to space for a lot of different reasons, but one of the most important ones is to study the universe, study our own bodies in microgravity so that we can get better insights into life here on Earth. And so any kind of technical background will do. And so I think studying hard obviously is going to be important. But I'd like to just pick up on what Jasmin was talking about. There are certainly ways that you can practice leadership and participating, whether it's team sports or other team activities like a band or a club. Those are actually ways that you can practice being a team player and practice being a leader and understand and actually get better at it. So I really encourage participation in group activities. The other things that I think can also help prepare you is to prepare yourself for some challenging physical environments. And so perhaps it's scuba diving, maybe it's learning how to fly an airplane, those kinds of things. And of course, finally, I'll add that we go to space with our international partners. And so having other languages is actually really helpful. You don't have to have like 10 of them or anything. Even if you speak one language other than the language English that we use here in America, it will actually give you a big advantage.
Okay, well, thank you for that answer. I have one question from Mason in Tennessee, which is, what was your favorite subject in school? Jasmin, would you like to answer that?
Sure, absolutely. So for me personally, I was one of those kids who loved a little bit of everything, but I have to say, I think my favorite subject was physics growing up, and I think it combined, I always really liked math, and then it combined that with practical application of how does matter work and how do things move in space. And so I think I also have to give kudos to my physics teacher in high school. She made what we were looking at on paper real by showing it to us with different experiments. And so that to me was really cool to see. I think before that, I didn't really understand how some of the things we studied had practical application. And so just being physically able to see it and do these hands-on things where it was real made me really love physics. So for me, physics.
Okay. Pam, I have a question for you. When you were a pilot, did you ever do a loop in the air? And what do G forces feel like? This is from Thessaly in California.
Yes, I have done many loops in the air and spins and all kinds of other fun things. The first time you do it, it's a little strange, but it's fun to see the Earth spinning around you. I think that's the way it feels sometimes, like the Earth is going around you, and it's sort of an unusual view. So G-forces, they sort of range. Sometimes it's just a little pushback in the seat. Think about it when you're accelerating in a car. Sometimes you feel, pushed back in your seat. It's not super uncomfortable. It's just a little bit. And then the G forces can be quite a bit. You can get up to 6, 7, 8, 9 Gs. And I'll tell you, even in the space shuttle, in the last minute or so of flight, you're lying on your back and you're experiencing 3 Gs through the chest. And it feels like somebody who weighs 3 times as much as you do is sitting on your chest, which actually makes it very hard to breathe. You're sort of panting a little bit, getting air in, but pushing it out is much harder. And but there are physical techniques that you can do to tense up a little bit to make it easier. And I don't know, I always thought it was fun, but I do have to say my favorite is still 0G.
Ooh, okay. Now you have thoroughly answered that question. I think they are excited. Let's see here. I have a question from Natalie in Texas. Have you ever failed at something and how did you respond? Jasmine, would you like to answer that? And then actually, Pam, can I circle back with you when we finish up? Jasmine?
Uh, Absolutely. I have failed many times. I alluded to it earlier, but um, I think when you're pushing yourself and doing challenging things, you should expect to fail. And it doesn't mean, well, hopefully you didn't fail because you just didn't put in the effort. But I have many times studied really hard. And I think for me, one of the most impactful moments was when I first got to MIT. I was used to being a really good student and being really good at math. And I got there, and the first test I took was a math test. Um, and when I got it back, it had a 24 at the top. And my first thought was like, well, is it out of 100? Yes. And so I was like, well, maybe everyone failed. Misery loves company. It would have made me feel a little better. So I kind of started peeking around the classroom, and people had 80s and 90s written on their paper. Because at that point, I was like, am I even going to graduate from MIT, let alone do well enough to be able to pursue this dream of becoming an astronaut someday? And so for me, I needed to learn different ways to study. I needed to uh, talk to different people and understand how to look at the problems differently than I was previously in that case. But I will tell you, at just about every major step of the way to getting to this point, I have failed, and failed in a pretty significant way. And the most important thing is, if you know that what you're pursuing is really worthwhile to you and something you're really passionate about and really want to do, just keep trying different things and don't give up, and and don't feel let down by failure. It is a sign that you're pushing yourself.
Thank you, Jasmine. Now, Deputy Administrator Melroy, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, I have to say I have had exactly the same experience as Jasmine. And there are some great sayings about there that a winner is a loser who tried one more time. And I could say that I had the same experience, Jasmine, getting a C for the first time in college and, feeling like, uh-oh. And I felt sure that everybody else in the class knew so much more than I did. One of the things that Jasmine said earlier that resonated with me is when you're going through the process of trying different things and trying to figure out how to learn, asking other people for help is so important. And I think, the other thing is that we all learn different things. Sometimes things come to us very quickly, and sometimes they're hard. And for me, actually, as much as I loved aerobatics, I wasn't nearly as good at it as I was at precision flying in instrument conditions. It's just people think, oh, you're a good pilot or you're not a good pilot. That's actually not true for anything that we do. There's always pieces of it that seem to come really easily and are intuitive, and then other pieces you just feel like you need to keep working at. And even docking to the space station, making mistakes in the simulator and learning from them. That's part of what you are there to do. Very few people ever do anything they've never done before perfectly the first time. So it's really about not quitting. And the point about, well, if you're really passionate about it and you really care about it, then don't quit, because eventually you will figure it out, and you might have to try a few different things. And I think that's been true all the way to the job that I'm in now. I made a mistake yesterday and had to call somebody this morning and apologize for making a mistake. And we laughed about it and said, okay, I'm not going to do that again next time. So it's part of life.
Thank you for that, and I hope that that resonated with the person who asked that question. Our next question is, what was the most unexpected thing you experienced while living and working in space?
Do you want Jasmine to take that one? Oh,
That would have to be for you, Pat. I'm
that has
paying
to
my
be for me. I
apologies.
forgot. Jasmine, you gotta get in space so you can answer that question. And you're probably listening and going, uh-oh, what. I think, wow. I mean, there was so much, right? We can't simulate the whole experience here on Earth. Uh, I think for me, it was that it's so difficult to understand how things move around in microgravity. So, a classic example of that is that because everything floats, it means there's a real risk it will float away. And so losing things is a real thing that happens on orbit. And just, figuring out how to move um, and how to move in a sort of elegant way instead of, I mean, rookies tend to bumble around quite a bit because you're using more energy than it really takes to maneuver in microgravity. And so you end up with a lot of bruises your first few days because you're
Mm,
sort of pinging off the walls all the time until you sort of get used to it. And so for me, I think that sensation of how microgravity feels to operate and to live in and to keep track of things. Now, of course, then you get used to it, and then you come back to Earth and you start dropping things. And
mm.
because you forget that if you leave something in the air, it will float in microgravity. Well, it's going to fall to the Earth here on Earth. So that transition both ways is actually pretty tricky.
Well, thank you for that. And Jasmine, we are going to get you to space.
Yes.
Sounds good to me.
We have a question from the Governor's School of Southside Virginia. What characteristics set you apart from other applicants at MIT? Jasmine, can I ask you that question?
You mean coming into this job as an
They,
astronaut?
they didn't get specific, so let's just say what prepared you from MIT to become an astronaut?
Yeah, I think some of the things we've touched upon already, but it is really one of the biggest things I think. Well, I think a couple things, but we've talked a bit about the teamwork, so I won't hit on that again. That is absolutely critical, and you cannot do this job without teamwork skills. But I think something else that maybe people just don't think about is we send people to space, whether it's the International Space Station where we have a crew right now, or in a few years to the moon. We're sending a fairly small group of folks. You know, you have on the order of a handful to 10 people, and those people need to be able to do all of the things. They are the maintainers, they are the doctors, they are the scientists. And so something that's really important is while most of us in pursuing this path, we specialized in something and we became the experts at our field in that thing before we became astronauts. Once you get here, you need to become a jack of all trade, and you need to get comfortable learning things that are absolutely outside of your comfort zone. You know, when I first got here, geology, I didn't even have any sense. I was like, okay, studying rocks, what's the big deal? But I learned it. It became one of my favorite subjects because you're basically a detective looking around both close in at the details of a specific rocks and at the big picture of what am I seeing around me and trying to determine, hey, what happened here to form this? And being the maintainer, you have to learn. Sometimes that's for us inside the space station right now, sometimes it's outside. So when it's outside, you also need to be able to get in your own spacesuit, which is your own little spacecraft, and that changes everything. So I think just being very adaptable to learning different things. And it goes back to asking for help, right? So in our class, we had a geologist. So when we were doing geology training, that was our go-to person we'd ask for help. When we were learning, the class was learning to fly the T-38s, people would come to the pilots and say, hey, how do you do this? How do you do that? And so I think that's really important, is recognizing this field, you have to really be a jack of all trades and you have to be adaptable.
Thank you. Pam, question for you. Any advice on how to get an internship?
Oh, well, I think I saw in the chat that there was a website about internships at NASA. There are a lot of internships at NASA. It's also important to know that it's a big industry. And so there are a lot of companies out there that work for NASA that also offer internships. So if you don't get a NASA internship, you should actually be looking in 2 or 3 places at least. But there are lots of opportunities. I can tell you that in the aerospace industry, people are really eager to have interns. It provides a potential pipeline for people who they want to hire. And so they get comfortable, they get to know you, they get to give you a little practical experience. And then it makes it easy to say, this person's a good fit, let's hire them. And that's true at NASA too.
Thank you, Pam. I have a few more questions. There's some amazing questions coming into the chat. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. They're asking some good questions. Let's see here. This question is from Morgan in Texas. It says, do you have to pass an exam to work for NASA? Jasmin.
Well, I don't think there's a specific exam when you're, you know, applying, but there are probably a lot of exams you'll be taking along the way uh, to get here. So I don't know that there's one specific exam that you take actually upon, you know, entry or application to work for NASA. But certainly I think a lot of us have taken many tests along the path to get here. I don't know if I'm missing something, Pam. Was there a test?
No, no,
Okay.
but I think you're right. There are a lot of tests to take. But you know, the great thing about getting a job is your degree speaks for itself. It says you are qualified, you know, whatever in your field, and then as you'll find the rest of your life, whether you're an astronaut or not, it's those personal qualities that also make a big difference.
This question's for the both of you. Pam, if you could answer first. How does it feel to be an inspiration to girls interested in science? This question is from Ayana in Texas.
Well, I have to tell you, it was very interesting to become an astronaut. Before that, certainly there were not a lot of women pilots or women test pilots, but even so, I was just one of a group out at Edwards Air Force Base doing my job every day. And when I became an astronaut and someone asked me for my autograph, I kind of, me? You know, so I felt a little uncomfortable about the idea that I was a role model until I really worked through it in my head. And I realized all it really means is that someone looks at you and thinks, well, if she could do it, certainly I could. So I got a lot more comfortable with it, and I'm happy to serve in that role.
And Jasmin, how about you?
I think I've had a very similar experience with it. It's something, you know, you know all your own flaws and weaknesses, so you certainly don't ever really think of yourself as a role model. But once I think I recognized, I think we probably can both look back and say there were not many females in our field. I was almost always the only Cobra pilot in a unit I was in, unless it was a period of transition where I was coming in and they were about to leave and we had a little overlap. And so I think recognizing that it does matter to see people that you can connect with and say, okay, well, if that person, it's exactly what Pam said, if that person can do it, I consider myself to be like them, so I can do it too. And it really clicked for me when we came in for our announcement, when my class was announced back in 2017. We put on our blue flight suits for the first time to get ready for the announcement. And of course, we were really excited for that. And we had some of our close friends and families with us. And my classmate's daughter, she was about 2 or 3 at the time. When we walked out, she said, "Wow, mommies can be astronauts too." And so that to me was kind of when it clicked, and I was like, it is important. It is important that people see us and that kids see us and know you too can be here.
Thank you. I know my nieces are watching and I know they're excited with that answer. I have a question from Roman Simmons. Do you think that humans will ever be able to live on the moon? Pam, may I ask you that question?
Yes, of course. In fact, that's what I'm working on every single day is to help wonderful people at NASA working on the technology and on the science and all the things that we need and the operations as well on the surface of the moon. But I'm telling you, I'm not stopping there. That's not my biggest goal. We got to get humans to Mars. And I have to tell you, I believe the first person to step foot on Mars is alive, and I think in school today. And I find myself thinking, could it be you? Am I talking to you? You're going to be the first person on Mars. And how exciting will that be to be dialed in, listening to you talk about your experience?
Thank you. We have just a few more questions. We're about to wrap up our session. One question I have is, do either of you have a study trick or tip that you can share for students who want to become astronauts?
Um, Everyone has a different method. For me personally, I'm very visual learner. And so to see something written down on a page is really important for me. But I think the other thing I learned, luckily fairly early on, that was really important is sometimes people have a tendency to want to review the stuff they already know because it builds their confidence going into something, but
Mm.
you need to review the things that you are struggling with more, and that's where you need to focus your time. And so when I realized that and said, okay, you need to know this part I've got down and I can kind of set that aside. I'll come back to it every now and then to make sure I don't lose it, but find out, know where you're weak and focus on those things when you study. So I think for me, figuring that out was really important.
And I think this will be one of our final questions. What can students do now to prepare for a career at NASA? And that is from Kelly in California.
Well,
Pam, may I ask?
I'd like to say something about that. I think the great thing that we do at NASA is we provide a lot of materials, but also a lot of opportunities. We have programs where students can participate in activities and challenges to actually start thinking about some of the problems and the challenges and the difficulties, for example, of humans, on the surface of the moon, how are we going to eat? All kinds of things. So I think really what I think will prepare you the best, other than studying and practicing being a part of a team, is to get out there and pay attention, because NASA is doing all kinds of things with students. So it's your opportunity to practice.
And I have one more question that came in. What is the Artemis program? Jasmin, would you like to give an overview of the Artemis Generation, what the program is?
Sure, absolutely. The Artemis program is our mission at NASA, and we're working with international partners on it, I'd like to say, but it's our mission to get us back to the moon in a way different than we did it last time. So we want to set up basically a camp on the moon, a base camp there on the lunar South Pole, and use that to figure out, hey, what technologies, what operational practices, what resources can we use that are on the moon to take us further and really set us up for going on to Mars. And so coming up in just a few months here, will be the first launch, Artemis 1. That will be with our Space Launch System and Orion capsule. That one will not have crew on board, but it will be testing the systems going around the moon. From there, we'll move on. So steps, right? So the next one, Artemis 2, will have crew on board and they'll go around the moon. And then from there, Artemis 3 is where we're looking to land humans back on the surface of the moon, and this time on the lunar South Pole. And then from there, we continue and sustain that and set up, as we said, sustainable living on the lunar surface that the Deputy Administrator has been working towards. I've been working on the lunar lander aspect of it specifically. So we're working every day on this Artemis program. And really, as she said, it's to set us up to go further onto Mars. And I believe exactly what you said. I think it's going to be one of the students that we're talking to that will be the ones going on there.
I just want to thank you both so much for taking the time out to talk to the children about STEM careers and your journey to NASA. Do either of you have any final words that you would like to share with the children listening and the students listening today? Pam?
I'll just say I, hope you enjoyed it. We sure love talking about things that we care so much about. And if there's one thing you could take away, it's do something that you love, because every job has its ups and downs and its challenges. But if you're doing something you love, it's wonderful. And then you get to hang out with wonderful people like Jasmin.
And Jasmin, how about you?
Yeah, I just want to say, well, first off, thank you for having us and thanks for tuning in and listening. And as we said earlier, I really look forward to watching what you all do in the future. And that's in all aspects, not just as it relates to space. Some of you may go into different fields, but I really am excited about where we're going and what you all will do for us in the future.
This is wonderful. And Pam and Jasmin, thank you so much for participating in today's STEM-a-thon. And to the students at home, thank you for attending today's session. We want to thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Bree. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you.